United States President Barack Obama is coming under fire for inviting Gabon's President Ali Bongo to the White House. The two leaders met privately in the Oval Office on Thursday. Critics say Bongo's family has used the nation's oil riches to fund a life of outrageous luxury for themselves. Gabon has a per capita income 4 times that of most sub-Saharan African nations, but a large part of the population remains poor. A drive through the suburbs of the capital, Libreville, reveals people on the streets desperately trying to make a living, selling food, clothing, and household items. Oil and gas are the main source of income. The Central African country is Africa's 3rd largest oil producer, but its petroleum output is declining. Analysts say that despite this abundance of natural wealth, poor money management and elaborate defense spending continues to hobble the economy of that country. Now, for further discussion on Gabon, we are joined by Melvin Ayogu of the Brookings Institution, also a fellow in the Africa Growth Initiative. His work focuses on growth, governance, and economic development. Mr. Ayogu, welcome to In Focus.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, first up, what do you make of this, the heat that was generated by the meeting of President Obama with Gabon's President Omar Bongo?
Naturally, when the president of a prestigious and highly important country like the U.S. meets with an African leader, it confers some legitimacy and prestige to the standing of that particular president. Now, critics and observers alike worry that in cases of countries where the leaders' record of either human rights or political emancipation or even economic development, or as you mentioned, record of public accountability is in doubt, such meetings tend to send a confusing signal.
Now, given that some of these meetings are a consequence of some of the developments at the international, economic or political arrangements at the United Nations, for example, would President Obama, for example, have refused to meet Mr. Bongo?
I would. That's a good question. If the president is very uncomfortable with meeting the president of Gabon, they would find a diplomatically acceptable way to avoid that meeting. And therefore, there is a merit to the concern that if the president of the United States meets with the Gabonese president, it's because the country wants to do so.
Some, of course, would think, well, if there's sufficient pressure from the West upon African leaders, perhaps this could change things on the ground. What is your take on that? Can this kind of treatment in the West really make African leaders who are accused of being corrupt and who are governing their countries badly change the way they're doing business in their countries?
Well, your question reminds me of the concept of constructive engagement, which was a term used by Ronald Reagan during the fight to end apartheid in South Africa. Lots of people were of the view that U.S. firms should not do business with companies in South Africa, and that in fact they should be ostracized or distanced. And there was a competing alternative view, of course, that by continuously engaging, you can actually push for changes both from within and outside. Gabon occupies a position of strategic importance in Central Africa. Lots of people do not know this, but Equatorial Guinea is a close neighbor. So is Cameroon, so is Congo, so is the DRC, and all the way to Sudan and Angola. And therefore, given the role that the late father of the current president had played in the peacekeeping, even if we have problems with the governance, we cannot ignore the security threat and conflict and security implications of engaging with a country like Gabon.
In about 10 seconds, do these African leaders have any motivation really to govern properly and stop the way they do things?
They do not.
That's a good way to end this interview. Thank you very much, Mr. Ayogu, for joining us today here on In Focus. That's Melvin Ayogu of Brookings Institution.